The sky above Winchelsea was a thick, brooding gray, mirroring the tension that hung in the air. Crowds lined the harbor and the cliffs, their faces etched with a mix of excitement and anxiety. They came from all over, hoping to witness something historic. Some had even traveled from the Queen's household, though Queen Philippa herself stayed back, 6 miles away, her heart heavy with worry for her husband and son. The English fleet, 50 smaller ships, bow-bared in the choppy waters, each vessel a floating fortress of wood and sail. At the helm of the largest ship, the Thomas, stood King Edward III, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Beside him was his 10-year-old son, John of Gaunt, who had begged to join his brother in this dangerous venture. The air was thick with the smell of tar, salt, and the anticipation of battle. Edward's fleet was a who's who of English chivalry. Knights of the Garter, earls, and military heroes Lancaster, Northampton, Warwick, Arundel, Salisbury, and Huntingdon each commanded a ship. Sir Reginald Cobham, Sir John Chandos, and Lord Manny were also among the ranks, ready to face the Castilian fleet. The Castilians, with their 40 to 44 large ships, were a formidable sight. Their vessels towered over the English ships, their sails billowing in the wind. The only way to engage them was to either ram them or sail ahead and slow down, waiting for the enemy to catch up. English archers, perched in the wooden forecastles and rear castles, readied their longbows, their hands steady despite the swaying of the ships. As the two fleets closed in, the first volleys of arrows flew through the air, a deadly rain of wood and iron. The English archers, despite the rough seas, managed to pick off a few crossbowmen on the Castilian ships. But the choppy waters made accurate shooting a challenge, and many arrows fell short or missed their mark. King Edward, leading by example, ordered his ship to ram one of the larger Castilian galleys. The impact was catastrophic. The Thomas shook violently, timbers cracking and splintering. For a moment, it seemed the English flagship would sink. But the collision had torn away the forecastle of the Castilian ship, leaving its front mast dangling. Edward's men, undaunted, prepared to board the damaged vessel. But the knights around him urged him to target another ship, arguing that the one they had rammed was already in trouble. Reluctantly, Edward disengaged, and his ship turned to face a new opponent. The knights and sailors worked frantically to bail out the water, their efforts a testament to their resilience and training. The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of steel and wood. Ships collided, grappling irons flew, and men clashed on decks slick with blood. The prince's ship, carrying both Edward's sons, was in grave danger at one point, but the Earl of Lancaster came to their aid, turning the tide of the fight. As night fell, the fighting continued. The Salle du Roi, commanded by Robert of Namur, was engaged in a bitter struggle. The Castilians had grappled the ship and tried to drag it away, but in the darkness, Namur's men fought back with ferocity. One of them cut the sails, halting the Castilian ship's progress, and the English won the night. By the time the battle ended, between 14 and 24 Castilian ships were captured, and the rest had fled. No English vessels were seized, and the victory was hailed as a triumph, on par with Cressy. Edward, his heart heavy with relief, returned to shore where Queen Philippa awaited him. He brought back both his sons, safe and sound, to her embrace. But the victory at Winchelsea was more than just a military triumph. It marked a turning point in Edward's life. The plague, the near disaster at sea, and the loss of his daughter had all taken their toll. He began to think more about creating lasting legacies, rather than just winning battles. The Order of the Garter, a symbol of chivalry and honor, was one such legacy. And at Windsor Castle, the place of his birth, he would build a palace that would stand as a testament to his reign, a monument to the glory of England and the ideals of knighthood. Windsor Castle, already a formidable fortress, would be transformed into the most opulent palace in northern Europe. Edward's vision was grand and ambitious, and he spared no expense. He brought in the best craftsmen and artists from across the land, and over the next 18 years, Windsor would become a symbol of his power and influence. The construction of the castle was a massive undertaking, involving hundreds of workers and costing more than £50,000. The internal renovations were particularly lavish, with the king's chambers adorned with intricate paintings and gold leaf. Philippa's quarters were no less impressive, with one room hung entirely with mirrors and another designed for dancing. Windsor Castle was not just a residence, it was a statement. It was a place where the Order of the Garter would be celebrated, where the greatest knights in Europe would gather, and where the king's vision of chivalry and kingship would be etched in stone. And as the castle rose from the ground, so did Edward's legacy, a lasting reminder of a king who had not only won battles, but had also shaped the future of his realm. Edward III was not just a warrior king, he was also a great patron of art and architecture. His vision for his kingdom extended far beyond the battlefield. He wanted to leave a lasting legacy, and his efforts to beautify his realm were as ambitious as his military campaign. However, much of what he created has not stood the test of time, making it a bit ironic that the structures and artworks he commissioned to honor his achievements are not as well remembered as the achievements themselves. Take Windsor Castle, for example. Edward's massive rebuilding project there was one of his crowning achievements, but today, few people connect the castle with him. Instead, they remember the Order of the Garter, which he founded. Similarly, Queenborough Castle on the Isle of Sheppey, once a symbol of his military might, has crumbled away, but the Battle of Crecy, which he won, is still remembered by many. The same goes for the great paintings in St. Stephen's Chapel, which once adorned the Palace of Westminster. They were lost in the fire of 1834, but the establishment of parliamentary representation, which he championed, remains a cornerstone of English democracy. St. Stephen's Chapel was a place of royal worship, and Edward was determined to make it the most splendid chapel in England. The project had a long and complicated history. It was first ordered by Edward I in 1292, but progress was slow due to the ups and downs of royal authority. By the time Edward III took control in 1331, the chapel was in a state of disrepair. He immediately resumed construction, and by 1348 the chapel was complete. It was a magnificent structure, 90 feet long and 30 feet wide, with a gallery connecting it to the king's chambers, but the building itself was just the beginning. Edward spared no expense in decorating the chapel. He brought in the best artists from all over England to paint the walls. The paintings were some of the most impressive of their time, featuring religious scenes, angels, doves, and even elephants and castles. The east window was adorned with figures of St. George, Edward himself, his wife Philippa, and their children. Unfortunately, most of these paintings were destroyed in the fire of 1834, leaving only a few fragments and some sketches as a testament to their former glory. Edward's artistic patronage extended beyond St. Stephen's Chapel. He employed the best carpenters, glaziers, and carvers to work on the chapel's furnishings. William Hurley, the king's master carpenter, and John of Chester, the master glazier, were just a few of the many talented individuals he brought together. Even the materials used were the finest available, from rare paper for designs to gold leaf for decoration. Edward's passion for art and architecture was not limited to the chapel. He also founded the Cistercian Abbey of St. Mary Graces near the Tower of London in 1350, though it was later destroyed during the Reformation. He rebuilt and expanded numerous royal residences, including Eltham Palace, Henley, Rotherhithe, and Woodstock. Each of these projects was a reflection of his desire to create a clean, ordered, and beautiful environment for his family and court. At Eltham, he added new lodgings for the royal family, rebuilt the walls, and improved the gardens and vineyards. At Henley, he spent over £785 on a new residence, and at Rotherhithe, he built a fine house with a wharf and vineyards. Woodstock, where his eldest children were born, received a new chamber for the Queen and a balcony for his daughter Isabella to enjoy the park. Edward's attention to detail was remarkable. He even installed a bathroom with hot and cold running water at King's Langley, a significant technological achievement for the time. This was a luxury that only the wealthiest could afford, and it showed Edward's commitment to modernizing his palaces. Despite his best efforts, many of Edward's buildings and artworks have been lost to history. But his legacy as a patron of the arts and a builder of grand structures remains. His determination to complete the unfinished projects of his predecessors and to create a perfect dynasty is a testament to his vision and ambition. Even though the physical remnants of his work are few, the spirit of his contributions to English culture and architecture lives on. In 1359, King Edward III of England began a grand project to build Henley Castle. This castle, though not as well known as some of his other residences, stands out for its strategic location on the Essex coast. Today, only a few jagged pieces of stone and tower walls remain, but in Edward's time, it was a magnificent structure. He spent over £2,300 on its construction, aiming to create a royal residence that would balance his other coastal properties, like the one he planned for the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. Edward's vision was to link all his grand residences along the River Thames. From Windsor Castle, his chivalric palace, he could travel by royal barge to Isleworth, which he had repaired, and to Sheen, which he was rebuilding. These journeys continued to Westminster, the Tower of London, and Rotherhithe, which was close to Eltham Palace. By the early 1360s, he added the Isle of Sheppey residence and the Manor of Gravesend, creating a network of royal palaces and castles that he could reach quickly and easily. In 1362, Edward acquired the Manor of Gravesend from the Earl of Suffolk. He spent more than £1,350 over the next 5 years to improve the royal chambers and facilities, making it another lavish addition to his collection of residences. These places were not just for show. They were practical and beautiful, reflecting Edward's keen interest in architecture and design. One of the most remarkable, but now lost structures, is Queenborough Castle. It was the only new royal castle built in the later Middle Ages, and was designed to be a formidable military fortress. Edward took a personal interest in its construction, much like he did with other projects such as the Priory at Bisham and the rebuilding of Roxburgh, Eltham, and Windsor. Queenborough was Edward's statement in stone, showcasing his ideas about defensive building. The castle was circular, with a diameter of 300 feet, and had no towers except those overlooking the 2 gates. These gates were designed as barbicans, which meant that anyone who broke through the main gate would be trapped in a narrow passage, vulnerable to arrows and other attacks from above. The outer court housed trebuchets and cannons, which guarded the sea approach to London. Inside, the king's residence was planned around the inner court, making it a perfect blend of palace, fortification, and gun emplacement. Edward's technological mind was evident in many of his projects. The bathrooms at Westminster and King's Langley had hot and cold running water, a luxury for the time. But perhaps his most significant contribution to technology was the introduction of the mechanical clock. The earliest mechanical clock for which we have clear evidence was built in Milan in 1335, but Edward saw an early version of such a clock at St. Albans Abbey in 1332. The abbot Richard Wallingford had created a machine that chimed regular hours and showed the movements of the sun and stars. Initially, Edward didn't recognize its importance, but by the 1350s he realized the potential of mechanical timekeeping. In 1352, he commissioned 3 Italian clockmakers to build a mechanical clock for him in London. This clock was transported to Windsor Castle and set up in the Great Tower, where it chimed the hours. The clock at Windsor lasted for many years and needed a new bell by 1377. Edward also installed clocks at Westminster and Langley, and at his great castle at Queenborough. The bell at Westminster, weighing 4 tons, rang the hour for over 300 years, and is often referred to as the original Big Ben. Edward's clocks were not just novelties. They were a significant step in standardizing time. Medieval people divided the day into 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness, with the length of an hour varying with the seasons. By introducing a regular timepiece, Edward was attempting to standardize time measurement, a practice that soon spread across the country. By the late 14th century, mechanical clocks were being installed in cathedrals like Salisbury and Wells, further solidifying the idea of standardized timekeeping. Edward's cultural patronage extended beyond technology. He was an avid reader and kept a library of 160 books at the Tower of London, which he often loaned to members of his court. His interest in books was clear from the large sums he spent on them. In 1335, he gave 100 marks to Isabella of Lancaster for a book he intended to keep. He also borrowed books, and sometimes failed to return them, indicating his deep engagement with literature. His library included historical texts, military guides, and even alchemical works, reflecting his broad intellectual curiosity. Edward's interest in learning was further demonstrated by his foundation of King's Hall at Cambridge and Queen's Hall at Oxford, institutions that valued education and knowledge. Edward's interest in the natural world was also evident in his collection of wild animals. He kept a large menagerie of exotic beasts, including lions, leopards, and a bear given to him by King David of Scotland. In 1333, he paid a keeper to care for his leopards, and in 1334, he took these animals with him when he moved the royal household to York. The menagerie at the Tower of London, where the Royal Library was also kept, suggests that the tower was a center of learning and curiosity. Despite the loss of many of Edward's cultural treasures, some items from his reign have survived. The gold coins of his era, particularly the gold nobles introduced in 1351, are among the most beautiful and well-crafted of the time. The Great Seal of the 1360s, known as the Bretagne Seal, is another masterpiece of Gothic design and execution. These small but significant artifacts provide a glimpse into Edward's artistic and cultural patronage, offering a window into a world of luxury, innovation, and learning that shaped the medieval English court. In the years following the plague, Edward III's focus shifted from the battlefield to the arts and architecture. His reign had seen many battles, but by 1350, Edward was more interested in leaving a lasting legacy through his patronage of the arts. This change is evident in the tombs he commissioned, particularly his own and those of his family. Edward's tomb, alongside those of his wife, Philippa, his brother, and his eldest son, the Black Prince, stands as a testament to his cultural vision. These tombs, especially at Westminster Abbey and Canterbury Cathedral, are not just resting places but works of art. The Black Prince's tomb at Canterbury, for example, features a detailed sculpted relief of his face and a realistic portrayal of his armor. This level of detail was rare for the time, suggesting a true representation of the man himself. Similarly, at Westminster, the tombs of Edward and Philippa are carved with lifelike images, based on death masks and portraits from life, respectively. These tombs marked a shift from the idealized, generic faces of earlier times to realistic depictions of real people, reflecting Edward's desire to be remembered as a real, iconic figure. Edward's interest in the arts extended beyond tombs. After the plague, he invested heavily in building projects, patronizing painters, sculptors, and glaziers. By 1370, he had spent over £130,000 on construction, creating palaces that would symbolize his kingship for generations. However, much of this work was later destroyed by fire and neglect, leaving us to rely on historical documents to understand the magnificence of these structures. Edward's change in focus also influenced his approach to law and governance. In February 1351, he faced Parliament, a body that had grown in importance and was increasingly assertive. Edward, now a seasoned king, was more concerned with justice and the well-being of his people than with military conquests. He opened the Parliament by declaring his commitment to doing right and correcting wrongs. This shift in tone was significant, as it signaled a move from the aggressive, war-focused policies of his earlier years to a more measured, peace-seeking approach. During this Parliament, Edward heard and responded to a series of petitions. He confirmed the Magna Carta and other important laws, but refused to revoke the wool subsidy, which was crucial for funding his military efforts. He also addressed issues like labor shortages and the role of the church in English affairs. One of the most notable outcomes was the Statute of Provisors, which prohibited the Pope from appointing foreign clergy to English positions, a move that strengthened the independence of the English Church. The Parliament of 1351 was a success, with Edward securing the wool subsidy and addressing many of the concerns raised by his subjects. He also took the opportunity to create new earls and a duke, rewarding loyal supporters and solidifying his authority. This parliament marked a turning point in Edward's reign, showing his willingness to engage with his people and work towards a more just and stable kingdom. However, the peace was short-lived. French aggression continued, and in 1351, the English lost the strategic fortress of Saint-Jean-d'Angely and faced the defection of the Count of Flanders to the French side. Edward responded by sending envoys to negotiate, and by preparing an army to defend Calais. Despite these challenges, he managed to secure a truce, which gave him time to focus on domestic affairs. In 1352, Edward faced another parliament, this time with a new approach. Instead of demanding taxes first and addressing petitions later, Edward's Chief Justice, Sir William Shershaw, encouraged the representatives to present their petitions up front. Edward agreed to consider these petitions in exchange for the necessary taxes. This collaborative approach led to the passage of the Great Statute of 1352, which addressed a wide range of legal and administrative issues. Edward's willingness to listen and act on these petitions further cemented his reputation as a just and responsive king. Edward's reign was marked by a balance between military prowess and cultural patronage, between war and peace, and between tradition and innovation. His later years saw a king who was more focused on leaving a lasting legacy through his buildings and laws, rather than just through his victories on the battlefield. This shift in focus reflects his growing maturity and his desire to be remembered as a king, who not only won battles but also built a stronger, more just kingdom. In the heart of 1352, as Edward III turned 40, a significant transformation was unfolding in the realm. The English Parliament, a body that had grown in importance under his rule, was convening to address a variety of issues, from the payment of fines to the codification of treason. Among the laws passed, the Statute of Treason stood out. This law, which defined high treason and petty treason, was a response to the chaotic and often arbitrary nature of treason accusations in the past. By clearly outlining what constituted a crime against the king, the statute aimed to bring a sense of fairness and clarity to a previously murky area of law. This was not just a legal formality. It was a part of Edward's broader effort to right the wrongs of the past, especially those related to the tumultuous events of 1327 to 1330, when he had to act decisively to secure his throne. Edward's personal involvement in these matters was evident in his actions over the next few years. He pardoned Sir John Maltravers, restored the Arundel estates, and even revisited his father's tomb in Gloucester. These gestures were more than just acts of mercy. They were part of a larger narrative of reconciliation and justice. Edward's careful reconsideration of the past, including the reversal of judgments against Roger Mortimer, showed his commitment to ruling with fairness and in the best interests of all his subjects. Meanwhile, on the international stage, Edward faced a dilemma. Despite a truce with France, an English squire named John Doncaster had captured the formidable castle of Guines, an act that threatened to reignite the war. Edward, torn between the temptation to claim this victory and the need to avoid a full-scale conflict, ultimately decided to keep Guines and pardon Doncaster. This decision, while controversial, demonstrated Edward's willingness to take bold actions when he believed they were in the best interest of his kingdom. The French response was swift and fierce. They assembled armies in Brittany, Gascony, and near Guines, ready to strike back. Edward, initially cautious, slowly mobilized his forces. Despite his reluctance, the English defense proved remarkably effective. In Gascony, the newly created Earl of Stafford led successful campaigns, and in Brittany, Sir Walter Bentley achieved a stunning victory over Guy de Nesle at Moron. The French, bound by their chivalric code, paid a heavy price for their refusal to retreat, with many of their knights falling in battle. Back in England, Edward celebrated Christmas with a grand ceremony at Windsor. At 40, he was well into middle age by medieval standards, and the festivities reflected his reign's blend of tradition and innovation. The elaborate costumes and the allegorical poem written by an East Midlands poet provided a glimpse into the changing social dynamics of the kingdom. The poem, a sophisticated allegory, depicted a conflict between Winner, representing merchants and lawyers, and Waster, representing the old feudal aristocracy. This conflict highlighted the tensions between the rising professional class and the traditional gentry, a tension that was both a product of and a challenge to Edward's policies. The poem's critique of both sides, accusing the old aristocracy of frivolous spending and the new professionals of avarice, suggested that the social changes of the first half of Edward's reign were not without their costs. The rising class of merchants and lawyers, while more economically savvy, were not necessarily more virtuous. The poem's moral was clear. True leadership meant balancing the interests of all, not just the wealthy or the powerful. As 1352 came to a close, Edward's reign was marked by a blend of legal reform, personal reconciliation, and military success. The Statute of Treasons, the pardons, and the victories in France were all part of a larger narrative of a king who sought to rule with wisdom and justice, even as he navigated the complex challenges of his time. Edward III's legacy was one of a kingdom that, while not without its problems, was moving towards a more stable and just future.